And good evening. Here we are, almost on time here. I thought for a minute it was going to be another late start, but I think we're up and running again. And welcome to all of you. I hope this is the case. I'm going to need to get things set up one more. Yeah, here we go. So here we are, November 10th, talking about the end times update, and I am very excited tonight to have a few things I think you'll find very interesting as we get going here. Um, but thank you for those who have been watching in previous weeks and making your comments. It's great to have you all apart. I'm glad to see my wife here in on this tonight. Missing her bad. She's been helping a sister who had a heart attack and helping sister and brother-in-law getting things set up. And haven't been able to see her for a while, but nice to see you here, darling, on the broadcast tonight. And for those who join us, otherwise, we'll be glad to have you a part. And thanks again for all those of you who will be watching this after the fact and checking in. But let's go ahead and start right in here because there is a lot to talk about tonight. And we'll start out with the update on the wars and rumors of wars. And I probably should again just give a brief reminder to those who wonder what is this, what's going on. What we're doing is we're taking prophecies starting with what Jesus said would happen at the end of the age, and we are numbering those prophecies. Wars and rumors of wars was a second prophecy that Jesus mentioned or spoke of in Matthew chapter 24. And so what we're doing is just connecting dots, prophecy, how it could play in this day and age and in this time. And this I know this one about the wars and rumors of wars has a lot of people sometimes scratching their heads and wondering, have there always been wars even before Jesus gave that prophecy? That's true, but what is different and that we are really trying to be mindful of here in these studies is that there is an intensity and a talk about wars that is new, not just in terms of nuclear war, but with the whole approach of social media and other media, as it is like everywhere instantaneous. And you don't have to be a news watcher, do you, to have to realize that the wars and rumors of wars are very much being felt and experienced. So here we are, jumping right in on this one. This is really intriguing to me. Here we're seeing in the last week, and by the way, most of these news items tonight, they are in this last week since last week's update. And there is just so much. I probably can't get to all of it. No way I can get to all of it, but I can at least talk a few things that I find quite fascinating and interesting. This one is because the rhetoric is building up more and more. Now, it's probably something you would expect at this time with what's going on all over the world, but with China and their interest in Taiwan and the resistance they see to that with the United States, there is quite a bit of anticipation in the upper ranks military circles that something is going to happen here and before long. Well, this comes out in the American military news that Xi Jinping tells China's military to prepare for war and prepare to fight and win it. So that's big talk when it's something that's being spoken blatantly and right up front with his own military and making it known to the Chinese people that this is going to happen. Let's go to the next one, which has to do with Russia. This intrigues me right here because not only is China talking it up, Russia is talking up the nuclear radiation issue. And this comes out of Newsweek here just in the last few days, where Russia warns of radiation disaster as it ramps up nuclear war talk. Now, you're probably like me, and I'm interested that there is so much talk right now about how America and Ukraine and NATO allies and others are winning this war. And I believe that's possible and to a certain degree. But when I see things like this, and when we read it, again, instantaneous around the world, and we hear these things, you have to realize that probably if there's ever a time that we could be on the brink of a nuclear war. It's now when you see these types of headlines over and over and over, and this is, as you would probably guess or know, this is just one of many. So we have to, again, bring this into consideration as part of possibly that end time narrative. How, much does it break from the past? How new is it? How clear is it? That's, I guess, yet to be determined. But the nuclear is, and the intensity of the warfare is, and the quickness of the rumors being told is. This is all new in human history right now with what technology we have and what is shaping up. Let's go to another category, prophecy. This one I felt we really need to talk about because this is a big week for the United Nations. They're having their big climate control conference over in Egypt. And out of that, you'd expect there to be some things coming up that talk about, but one of the things Jesus said is there'd be great earthquakes. Now, you're going, what does that have to do with climate control? And some of you who have been studying this for a while now, you know where I'm going with this. The original word in the Greek word is seismos. So what we have here is seismos being a meaning of a wave that's harmful or damaging or powerful, whether it is ground waves, which would be earthquakes, or wind waves like hurricanes, tornadoes, and cyclones, things of that nature, or water waves, which may be a little more cyclone, that would be very powerful with all that goes, tsunamis, that kind of a thing. Those are all seismos. And Jesus said there would be great seismos. Well, here's what I'm interested in right out of this conference this week. We have, of all things, this coming from scitechdaily.com. And that is, there's code red. Scientists warn that climate change has pushed Earth's vital signs to record extremes. Record extremes. When you read the article, you're kind of impressed that, yes, there's some amazing things said. In fact, just one of the things that came out of the article that I found very fascinating, do you know that in our country, years prior, I believe we've averaged 8 storms that did $1 billion of damage or less, or more, excuse me. And in the past 5 years, we've averaged 18 storms. Now, I know dollars figure in and their value, but not that much inflation is affected to disprove the fact that there is more going on right now, however that plays into what could be end times. There's more going on right now than there has been since records have been kept, and that's quite fascinating to me. I'm going to be looking for more statistics that have to do with the actual intensity of storms. We've heard about earthquakes too, of course, there's more of them now, over 7.2 than ever since records kept. Let's go to another thought coming out of this is a really interesting comment from the Hill, where a comment coming out of this conference with the United Nations says, UN chief says, we are on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator. And this is interesting, the things that they're talking about here that really are emphasizing the world we live in and the lack of stability climate-wise. There's a lot that shows up in that article. I wanted to show you this, kind of an interesting thing. This is not a news item, is it? But it is, because would you believe that now individuals are going to be tracked and are being tracked? This is mine. This is something I received. I didn't ask for it. It was a summary of my travels in this year. It's not complete. It's not accurate by any means. It's partly accurate. I've been in 3 countries, not 2. I've probably been in many more cities than that, and many more places than that. And I know I've traveled much further in 2022 than 6,000 miles, because one trip was twice that when I had the privilege to go to the Holy Land. But this is interesting because I want you to notice one little piece right here in the middle of this report that came to me on my phone about me and my travel. Notice a little plant leaf there, and it says low emission travel, 1 mile. Now, I think I have walked more than a mile in this year. So it's not accurate, like I said, by any means. But the very fact now that I am getting this report, you probably are too, tells me that this terminology and this whole psychology is evolving and evolving quite quickly. Um, you have heard me talk in other broadcasts, giving an update about how that there is a system that is coming down the pike through corporations called ESG. It's going to be a way that individuals around the world are tracked in terms of their support of environmental, social, and governance issues. And they say, and I think I don't know, this could be conspiracy, and yet it just makes perfect sense because of what corporate leaders and world leaders with the World Economic Forum and the United Nations people are saying, well, and for that matter, the President of the United States of America and the new Prime Minister of Great Britain, they're all talking the same language. And you know, I have people say, how could that ever happen? We're a democracy. We're never going to buy into this. This is not going to be approved for decades. Well, I thought that for a long time. And then one day it came to me, that didn't come to me because of my own brilliance, which I lack. It came to me from a talk I heard where a fellow was just speaking matter of fact, and he was talking. He was a corporate leader. He was talking about the fact that this ESG, environmental social governance rating system, that will affect people around the world in terms of things on money and rewards for being supportive, credits, whatnot, and also debits, taxation for those who are not. But he was talking about that this is not something that is going to be rolled out by governments. This is going to be by the big corporations that have the money in the world. And I did a little more study based on that, and sure enough, companies like BlackRock and Vanguard, some of these companies that have the vast amount of wealth tied up in their companies. Um, in fact, Louisiana just recently withdrew money from one of those companies because it said it did not agree with what it was doing here along these lines. But it's going to happen through the economy and through the private sector, so to speak, big business sector, and affect all of the masses, not just United States wise, but worldwide as this system comes into play. So now I see how it could happen. Before, I was one who said it never will happen. But what does that have to do with earthquakes? Well, it's because supposedly of our humankind lack of caring and stewardship of the earth. And I, by the way, am a big believer in stewardship. I think we are to take care of what God has created and that He's allowed us to experience. But from this standpoint, um, because the world is having this rise in temperature, many scientists believe, and many others do not. But because there are storms with intensity, and we can't argue a lot of statistics that climate is changing some way, and there is a lot of harm going on worldwide from a climate standpoint, to have individuals being held responsible and to see this come up here, this is news because this is the first time I have seen something tracking me, even though it's not accurate right now, tracking me, holding me responsible in a way indirectly for the future seismos in our world, the climate changes that cause great waves and damage there by such. So I wanted to share that to you. That's rather interesting. Some of you may have already seen this on your own phones and apps, but quite interesting. And for those who are saying, uh, where is this at? I think this was on a Google app and maybe Google Travel or Maps. I will know more hopefully the next time. I just had my phone to ask me what it can do to help me when I mention Google. All right, let's go to the next one here. This is somebody you need to meet. This is a fellow named Dr. John Mitchell out of Great Britain. This fella is he's very interesting, and he doesn't. I mean, he has a whole lot of followers, a couple million plus. So yeah, what he shares, yes, what he shares is news, I want you to be aware of this because you're going to hear from him some things that you would not hear otherwise. Um, it's just quite fascinating. And I'll double check something here real briefly because what he does a lot is he tracks and he takes information from very reliable sources and then he passes it on, but he gives a commentary on it. And well, shoot, I was wanting to find something here if I could that just popped into my mind. But this is a very interesting um, bit of information he's sharing here. I don't know if you can read it on your screen, but it's deaths registered in the UK. He's tracking here some deaths in UK the week ending October 21 of 2022, which is a few weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago. But notice here, and this is what he does. It's just so interesting to me, and he does give his sources very well. And by the way, as I've told many of you, I am glad to share sources. Um, if you ever want to say, where did you see this? Where did you find that out? I am very glad to let you know. And I think I goofed. I think I said Mitchell. It's actually Campbell. If I did say Mitchell, sorry. It's Dr. John Campbell. And see if I can turn this off while we're at it. Notice here what he's pointing out. This is huge. This has to do with pestilence and disease for sure. And a lot of people, the mainstream media, I've got to tell you this. I'm not one of those who's going to make comments like I heard a former president make, but because I think that everybody is capable of presenting or misrepresenting things that they want to make certain points. This, looking at facts, what he's pointing out here is that right now there are more people dying weekly than there were at COVID at its height. And these are called excess, EXCESS, excess deaths. It's a very, very interesting thing that is happening. There had already been rumor of it. In America, it's happening too. There'd been rumor. In fact, there's a study out right now that's showing that, and you may already know this, but there is the CDC in our own country has a reporting online reporting service where people who have had adverse reactions to a certain medication or drug can report. And what is so interesting when you start hearing this, and this is not conspiracy, this is the United States government giving this information out. And by the way, this is not a requirement that people report. This is voluntary. It has to be reputable. It has to be sources, people who can be verified as legitimate. But what they're pointing out is that there have been more deaths due to the vaccination, the COVID vaccination. Now, it appears to have helped many people too, but there have been more deaths from the COVID vaccination in the past 2 years than all vaccinations combined in the previous 30 years. So this is part of that is coming out where the truth is starting to come out more and more about certain things. And he is one who does that. You may want to check into that because right now, disease and pestilence is more than when we had huge governmental involvements with people being locked down and masks and all that went on. There are more deaths now happening than there were at that time. And nobody is, this doctor, he is beside himself saying, I do not understand why the world is not responding or not doing anything right now. So it is of interest. It's of great interest, and it should be of interest to all of us as we seek truth. Let's go on to this little topic right here, and I blocked something here. There's Prophecy 16, there will be catastrophic events in the heavens. Now, if it's truly a sequence of things that Jesus talked about, and it sounds like there was, because he mentions that, don't worry about anything with the wars and rumors of wars. That's just it's just the beginning. That's not anything serious yet. Then he goes on and says, that the beginning of birth pains, and he goes on to then the end will come. Well, this is kind of in that end category of what Jesus talked about. But if you recall, one of the things that we have been trying to emphasize here is that what appears to be happening in an amazing way is that so many of the things that Jesus said would happen, we're having kind of this trailer, this pre-psychology, this not premonition, but there's a word I'm trying to think of that's tying in with that we have this sense, this awareness of some things that we haven't really had awareness of before. Well, interestingly, just this past week, a solar flare hit Earth, causing radio blackouts in Australia and New Zealand. So, how's that for interesting news? Let's go on to something that I find even fascinating, closer to home in a way. This meteor hurled through the sky and it destroyed a man's home. Now, there have been a number of meteors. We talked last week about how suddenly they're finding asteroids that are coming it's within millions of miles, but it's within hazard distance of the world. And when you think of Jesus talking about how that the stars would fall like ripened olives off of an olive tree, it just really makes you think when you see things like this. And this week we had an interesting thing. It actually happened 2 or 3 times in the past week. That's what also interests me. But here's this one talking about a meteor entered Earth's atmosphere on Friday night, possibly crashed into a home of an unsuspecting Nevada County cattle rancher in California. Well, it turns out after that, here comes more news. And yes, it did hit a man's house. And this particular article almost amuses me. I get tickled reading it. And I'm not meaning to make fun of anybody or anything. It's just that it shows you how, that was almost an unintended pun out of the blue. These things can come and happen. And I think that's part of what is getting people's attention. But this homeowner, Dustin Procida, mentioned that his property encompasses very quiet land in the country where cattle graze. He was sitting on the couch listening to music when the meteor hit his porch. I heard a big bang, Procida shared with KCRA. I started to smell smoke. I went onto my porch and it was completely engulfed in flames. And yes, they did verify it was this, supposedly verified this was the meteorite that people had seen streaking across the sky. And he lived through it. So quite interesting things that are happening like this. But again, it's things that are happening, and because of the media that we have, where we get these stories just with bombarding us, there is this awareness of these things happening, and kind of in an interesting way. Some people said, these things have been happening forever, and I think meteors have been falling for forever, it seems. But what intrigues me is that we are hearing about them and seeing them and hearing their stories, and hearing about a human being like you and me sitting in their living room listening to music when they hear a thud and they go to check it out and they smell smoke, and a meteor landed on their porch. So it just I think you can see part of what I'm interested in here. So that we'll for time's sake stop that for the update at this point. We'll go right into the class because we're going to jump in. We got lots to talk about. We're going to do a whole quick session here on the 6th class about what John the Revelator saw. And if you want a good overview in how much time do we have, about 35 minutes if we take it all. There are going to be 18 revelations that we find here in looking at the book of Revelation, that John, things he saw. Some of you are going to feel like these are too generalized. I would encourage you to study them. I've had several of you ask for the outline I've used with the references. You're welcome to email me at davidcarey.lifecoach@gmail.com, and that's CARY, David Carey, CARY, lifecoach@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to. And some of you have my phone number and can text or whatever, but if you want copies, feel free to send. I can get you the full 18 list, because I'm going to go really fast through the first 9 as we review last week. But it's a good study, and it'll give you a good feel. And what I'm doing, and I'm going to remind you, we are in this study starting with what Jesus said was going to happen, because he did not talk in mystery language. He talked straight answer to these disciples who came saying, what were you talking about when you said not one stone at the temple would stand on top of the other? And he gives them a very honest and direct answer. So we'll be focusing on that here from the standpoint of what does Paul and John, Old Testament prophets, say that fit exactly what Jesus said. And of course, the more we study, the more amazed I am how it does all fit together, it ties together. And it's not as complicated as I used to make it until I accepted what Jesus said as what he meant. a lot of other things did not make sense to me. But the moment I did and used the old hermeneutical, that's how do you study the Bible? You explain what is unclear by what is clear. When I started doing that, it's amazing how these things started making good sense, and so much of it now just it all fits. And the things, things John saw in Revelation, they expound a little bit seemingly on things that Jesus said, but it fits. It fits very well. Let's jump into it. First thing John saw was a time when everyone would see Jesus coming in the clouds. Second thing, John saw churches with both good and bad qualities. 7 churches that he listed there, and there's a message for every one of them by an angel specifically giving a message to them. And in chapters 2 and 3, maybe part 1. Third thing, John saw a great ongoing celebration of worship in heaven and on earth, which I like, fits, and really puts and keeps a lot of the whole end times in perspective. I really think that that's something we have to remember, and it's going to be a huge part of our staying strong and enduring to the end, whatever that end is. John saw a time of tribulation with martyrdom, and that was very much a clear thing there in Revelation 6. Fifth thing, John saw a time of tribulation with physical catastrophes. This is really interesting to me. Here's some of what we talked about a bit ago, where Jesus did talk about not only earthquakes, but the sun turning black, moon turning red, stars falling to earth as late figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. So here is that talk. 6, John saw Jerusalem being trampled by the Gentiles for 42 months. Specific time. Fits very much what Daniel says, and we will be talking about that here in just a week or two. In fact, I think it is next week. We'll be studying the Old Testament prophets, similar to what we're doing with Revelation. A little slower than I'm doing this review, but it'll be hitting highlights of Old Testament prophecies and how they fit in, and very much 1,500 years before Jesus shared from them or knew they fit. And this is definitely one of them right here for the 42 months. 7, John saw 2 witnesses sent from God to prophesy on earth. Very interesting story there, as we talked about. 8, John saw a dragon, which is Satan, supernaturally empowered 2 beasts. And that's much of that there in Revelation 13. 9th thing, John saw a global system established where a mark was required to buy or sell, which of course we call mark of the beast. And it's right there in Revelation 13, very clear, but it doesn't just stop there. This is where it introduces the idea of the number being a number of a man, 666, where many people have speculated for many, many years as to what that will involve. But here's this global system, which is a key thing, and we will do a lot of talking about that in time to come, because it is very significant what is shaping up, very, very much so. I'm tempted to get sidetracked here again, but we've already spent some time on that, and we want to go on. So number 10, where we now start giving a little more thought. This is the one that I mentioned to you all that my wife bought a new Bible recently that was produced by Tyndale Publishers, and in the front cover, inside on the title page, no, on the copyright page, it has at the bottom a box that very clearly says that Tyndale is working with the Wycliffe Bible translators on a new goal project, because for a good while Wycliffe said they would have the Bible in every language, the gospel in every language, by the year 2150. They dropped it way down when all these translation services started becoming available. Had it in the 2030s or thereabouts. But now in this Bible, in a special little notation, and why it's even on that page, I'm very interested. It says that there is this new goal, Tyndale working with Wycliffe to have the Bible in every language by 2025. And you're right, this is 2023, almost in a couple months. So, okay, so I was getting ahead of myself. It's 2022, but just looking at a couple, 3 years, and this will be a reality. It's being worked on. Well, many of us are working on other things, and I'm in construction work and life coaching work, and many of you, and all these other trades and work. Well, we're all working away. These people are working away along with many others, by the way. There are many translation companies that are working together, organizations, to see this happen. And Jesus says in Matthew that when this happens, right there in line with quite a few other prophecies, then the end will come. So I don't know what you think and feel about where we're at in the big picture. I have heard it from many a soul now that, hey, hasn't this been talked about for every generation since Christ said it? I think it has, probably. Many of them did not know um, how to get a feel for things, and they really read things. Um, they were even thinking, I don't know how they communicated, except, with a fellow running or riding a camel or riding on a ship or what. They got messages back and forth to each other and learned about things going on. I don't know how they would have ever known when the Bible or gospel would be in every language. But technology, and that's what's partly different about us here in 2022, technology now allows us to see this and have an understanding that no other generation, none, and I've had people have to stop and say, agree. No other generation has had all of these things shaping up at the same time, or the ability to communicate on all of these things that we have now. So there probably should be a little urgency on a lot more people's part than is. And again, I probably would not have had much urgency had I not had something amazing happen. Another story for another time that many of you have heard back in 2014. But here we are, studying away. Let's go to number 11. John saw the fall of Babylon the Great. He talks about it in chapter 14, but he also spends two other chapters talking about it, chapter 17 and 18. Second angel fallen said, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. And if you want to read more about those two chapters, 17 and 18, good scriptures to read and get a feel for what a terrible falling it was. And you'll see when you read those two chapters, especially, why many people think or feel like this is America that's being referred to. And I have to even agree. I have read it several times when I wasn't really looking for that, and it just comes back to me that it's very possible. Otherwise, we don't have mention of the Americas in scriptures. I've heard Bill Salus, a modern day prophecy scholar, who I really admire, talk about how that there are a couple of Old Testament prophecies that talk of certain influences in the world that he says could very well be America. And that's another study too. But at this point, this is what John saw, and it was very, very significant. And he wrote a lot about it, and it was powerful. Let's go to number 12. John saw the Son of Man on a cloud harvest the earth. Now, I'm going to slow down just a bit on this one, because there are many people who they don't see or haven't seen in the book of Revelations where there's a chance of about what we would talk about with, as Paul talked about, the rapture. But right here in the middle of all of this is really an interesting bit of scripture, and you may want to read the whole chapter because there's quite a few things here spoken of in different ways throughout the chapter. But here we have John writing, I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Then another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. So he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Now, it's not a lot. It doesn't say a huge amount, but here is just quite an interesting bit of scripture that sheds a light or gives the real possibility on and excuse me, I'm having to block somebody here who was getting in on our chat room that probably should not be there from all indications. But this is one of those times when you just go, okay, that's not that complicated, and it fits everything. In fact, it even fits a little bit in this chapter, the sequence of what Jesus said would happen in a sequence. And if you read it, you can study it. Now, here's something that's very interesting. When we go to the 13th thing John saw, and that is John saw the wrath of God poured out on those who took the mark of the beast. Let's read Revelation 14. This follows right after this talk of harvesting the earth by the one sitting on the cloud like this to the Son of Man. A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast in his image and receives his mark on the forehead or on the hand, he too will drink of the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. He will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb." This is quite sobering, and it's quite alarming, and it's, for all the people who think that talk about end times is just a sensational thing or a hobby thing or a kind of a fun study or just an interesting study, it's this kind of scripture that really makes me sit up straight and feel a little bit of urgency, because when Jesus, back in chapter 25 of Matthew, warns people, and it shows up also in Mark and in Luke, where the same thoughts are being shared by the disciples about what Jesus said, there is this real sense of warning, and we get a feel of how much Jesus cares about us. He does not want us to experience any kind of God's wrath. I really feel the need to repeat that. In fact, just tell you this, I knew a fellow once who had he'd grown up in a home of faith. Parents were good believers, Christian believers. He'd wandered far away, and then he came back after he had contracted AIDS, and he really was struggling because he saw God as a very mean-spirited individual. And it was my privilege and pleasure to bring out scriptures that countered that. And I would like to emphasize that in the light of the scripture for those that might watch. And that is the God that we come to know when we come to know him personally, and we start seeing the word for what it says and study all the scriptures. What a beautiful, beautiful emphasis there is on the love of God, and how that he does not want people to experience anything that is harsh or the wrath of God. And I can't emphasize that enough at this point. And it certainly comes out beautiful right here in the book of Revelations. It comes out in Jesus' talk, his warnings, his alerts, his encouragement for people to wake up as they near the end. It's all about what he wants to do to have a fellowship with his creation and a reconciliation, and for people to experience his love. Of course, he wants us to love him, but my love for him is probably not near as important as his love for me. And to be able to experience that, and for those of you who would be studying this, I would be really off to not take a moment and just emphasize right here that for those who are fearful of his wrath, you don't have to be, if you are doing the things that he clearly indicates and tells us to do in the scriptures. And one of those things, very obviously, right here in the end time study, is we're not to have anything to do with that mark of the beast that is required for buying and selling when that time comes. And I have people say, do you think we'll know when it comes? And of course we do. We will. I mean, now, when I say that, it's for the people who are looking for it, watching for it. I think it's going to come in a way, because there's a talk about being wise, being attentive. I think there's a chance it could slip in where some people might not see it slipping into their lives. They see it as meeting a need. They see it as something for survival. They're not really paying attention. And I'm talking about good people. Maybe some believers too. I don't know where to draw the line and all that, but this is something that when you go from here on to the next few chapters, in fact, let's go on here just a bit. You go on, you see that Well, I didn't put that, but in the next couple of chapters, it talks about that wrath. And if you read those, you do not want to have anything to do with that. So good admonition there. Let's go number 14. John saw Christ come to earth with the armies of heaven to destroy the nations. This is after the fall of Babylon, after the wrath. It's toward the end of the tribulation period, as we think of it. Revelation 19, I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and makes war. Now, up here, I gave you the full reference, chapter 19, verses 11 through 19. And it is a great description there of what's shaping up when Jesus and the great army, the heavenly host, come to destroy the nations at the end of the tribulation. It's quite amazing. Let's go to the next thing, Revelation. John saw Christ lock up the beast for 1,000 years after killing his followers. Right here, Revelation 20, verse 2. He, Christ, seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil over Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him to keep him from deceiving the nations anymore until the 1,000 years were ended. And there's more talk of it there, but that is really interesting to me. Why? I don't know. I'm so interested that, I mean, he takes the two other beasts, the one that set up the mark of the beast, the other one, the first one that gave him the power. Those two are cast into hell right at this time. But for Satan, he locks him up, and there is question as to, is that 1,000 years literal? Is it figurative, as the saying goes in the Bible? Years as with the Lord, years as 1,000 years is as a day, I believe it is. So who knows how long it is? But there is a period of time that Satan is locked up and it's sealed over him, and this is something that John saw, and it fits. There's nothing that is in conflict with any of this. Let's go to the next thing here. John saw Satan thrown into hell to burn forever after one last challenge. So after that 1,000 years, in fact, let's just read it from Revelation 20, verse 7. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. In number, they are like the sand on the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them, and the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So there you go. There is the ending of Satan in terms of his influence on earth. It says he's going to be tormented forever and ever. So it's not the end of him as an entity per se, but it is definitely a very significant ending that as far as his influence on earth, and what a day that will be, eh? Can hardly imagine. No more evil, no more of the influence of Satan and his demons, and what that does in wreaking havoc in people's lives and through people's lives. So that's an amazing type thing here that I think we'll have to just now. There are people who ask, where will we be at this time? And that is a little bit there. For that 1,000 years, there is another scripture, and we may want to make this as one of the revelations, but that the people of God will be reigning on earth for that 1,000 years in a great time of peace. So that's a thriller. In fact, I do need to add that point because that's rather significant for those of us who hold on to the great hope. Very significant. So I'm still working through this and learning like the rest of you. And I do welcome, by the way, I've had several of you give good thoughts that I do go back and often add things. So thank you for that. 17th thing out of 18, John saw a great white throne judgment. This is their Revelation 20, after Satan has been cast into hell. He said, then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. Earth and sky fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. The sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them, and each person was judged according to what he had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. And this is where a lot of theologians, scholars get this whole idea, concept of death and Hades being one form, place for those who die without having chosen to trust in God or believe in him, but that there is an ultimate end in a lake of fire. And the scripture bears that out, supports it quite plainly. But great white throne judgment. And how much of that is literal, very interesting to know. And yet I do believe that what that's saying is there will be a great judgment day for all peoples. So then we go to the last point tonight to focus on, and that is probably one of my favorite all time in the book of Revelations. I hope you'll take time to read, especially chapters 21 and 22. This is probably the best part of a Revelation from the standpoint of the happy ever after ending. And I know there are a lot of people who just, almost don't, they don't know, and I probably am one who do not really know how to appreciate what this is all about. I am interested in the description of the new heaven and new earth. It's quite interesting. You're reading down through there. But I would hate to have us get caught up, and I hear people all the time get caught up in all the visual and all the beauty and all that's going with that, which I think is going to be amazing, absolutely amazing. But I think the thing that we don't want to forget is what John saw back there in early on in the book of Revelation, and how impressed he was, because it goes through all this time of the book of Revelation, and he comes now to the end, which is back almost where he started, with this idea that God is going to be praised and worshiped for eternity. And this new heaven and new earth, the idea that the sun won't be needed because God is there and is the light. And it's going to be another world entirely, but my mind immediately goes back to the visuals. And yet I think that the thing we want to realize is that what Revelation is about, what the end times is about, what Jesus was about in talking about it. If you stop at the end of Matthew 24, you miss on what Jesus is really talking about, the importance. Again, this desire that he would be able to spend eternity with those who accept his love. And that's where we're at. This is what is so beautiful about those last two chapters, and this realization that for many people, it's just a science. It's just a thing of wrestling with should we believe or not believe. He wants us to get past all that. He wants us to very much study the end times with a very heartfelt desire to experience him and his grace and his forgiveness of our sins. And as I've said before, the best argument I know of for faith in God is not anything I read or what I hear from somebody. It's what I experience myself when I believe, when I accept and trust him, and what he does by his spirit in me. The scriptures talk of enlightenment. What John experienced, this was by the Holy Spirit, obviously. But you and I, as people in 2022, we can have this kind of a spiritual awakening where we can know, and I mean know as sure as we know we exist. There are some people who question that about themselves, and I really feel like they should be somewhere getting special help. But if you can accept that you exist and then choose by your own will to accept God exists and accept his way and seek to please him, suddenly he does something by his spirit that nothing else can do. No one else can do. He does what we can't do for ourselves. And that is, he brings his word alive. And that's where in this, I have no doubt, it ends on this wonderful, beautiful thought of us being with the Lord. It's no wonder that John even was saying, even come Lord Jesus. I mean, this whole thing, there's a very personal thing here. And it's all gobbledygook and makes no sense, and probably is a frustration to many people when they hear of anybody talking like they know God personally. But you can yourself, all of us can. And it's what will give us hope to endure through the worst of what times present. I think, yes, we have a very good chance that we are going to be in this generation. And I think the more we study, if you'll keep studying, I think you will too. But don't let the fear of his wrath or what is to come ruin you in your search for a very personal, close encounter with him, because that is going to be the greatest of anything that could come out of this whole study or time in our lives. Now, there's not a whole lot more I'd want to share tonight. I covered things a little faster than I might normally. I don't guess we need to wait till the lights go out. I still have a few minutes. And I would, I'm trying to think if there's anything I wished I had said last week when I did feel like I had to cut it short. But this is for your benefit tonight, that we can, some of you may want to go watch a football game, like I'll hope to do at some point. But this is more important. I think we all would understand. And I would encourage you all to keep writing, responding if you don't mind. In fact, some of you have really enjoyed it. You caught me in person and have talked to me about some of the things that stand out to you and what it means. Thank you for doing that. We'll go ahead and end on this note, and just know that you're in my thoughts and even prayers, that somehow whoever has a chance to hear this, it will somehow truly quicken them spiritually, as I seek myself to continue to grow and understand more and more. So thank you. Till next time, God bless.